And now, for our Captain Adams VHS Pirate Ship special presentation. Last time on Into the Microverse! We explored some arcade classics that didn't have characters to base our success upon. We talked about the history of Space Invaders and how it was weird it never got a miniature arcade cabinet until 2005. With Excalibur Electronics' really shitty version of it. We talked about Galaga and how it set a new standard by being the first video game sequel. And how its popularity surpassed that of its predecessor, Galaxian, and how pretty much everybody forgot about that game. Captain Adam plays My Arcade's miniaturized version of Galaga and discovers that there's just something amiss. We delve into the history of Centipede and how bizarre of a game it really is. And how that game has more to do with mushrooms than it does centipedes. In fact, it really should be called mushrooms instead of centipedes. Captain Adam reviews Basic Fun Incorporated's second miniaturized version of this acid trip of a game. As we approach the final leg of the journey, where will we end up? Join us for the finale as we go even further for the last time into the Microverse! The future. A place where all our dreams come true. A place where life is made easier by the evolution and advancement of our technology. A wonderland of autonomous appliances that help us with everyday life. A place where the vacuum cleaner can help with your schoolwork and the refrigerator knows your web browser history. An endless dreamscape of technology that surpasses anything we've seen before. Or maybe that's a bunch of bollocks. Yes, we as humans have always romanticized the concept of the future, and it usually never turns out the way we think. Though we do have some pretty advanced technology nowadays, living here in the future isn't exactly what we assumed it would be. The biggest problem is we expect too much, and we all have to stop using Back to the Future Part 2 as some kind of gauge of what the future's supposed to be. Some things in that movie we do have, like hoverboards, even though the battery catches on fire, and besides, it's not a hoverboard, it has wheels! And everyone wants flying cars, which thankfully we don't have. Flying cars? Most of you can't even handle cars on the road! So yes, Back to the Future Part 2 is only a movie, and nothing is going to be like the Jetsons. Even though we do have automatic robot vacuum cleaners, which is fun until they pick up a dog turd and smear it around your room like sidewalk chalk. The future means advancements in all different types of fields, including architecture. Well, that's kind of true. I mean, that's not always what it's cracked up to be. Look what they did to McDonald's. Yeah, they took a fun and colorful place and turned it into some kind of Soviet-era bunker. Well, the future does have its drawbacks, but part of the future are trends going full circle and coming back into vogue. Yes, whatever is old is new again, and part of looking forward is looking back. And there will always be an immense interest in nostalgia, which is basically why I have this channel, and basically why you watch it, which I'm very thankful for. Mwah! And bringing the past into the future most certainly applies to the miniature arcade cabinet. Yes, a fun little concept that Coleco started in 1981 that ran supreme through the early 80s, then suddenly disappeared and was brought back in the early 2000s by various companies. And it's a novelty that's still running wild today. And as we've established through the course of this miniseries, there are three separate eras of the miniature arcade cabinet. There is the original era, which is 1981 through 1983, and this encompasses the Coleco line of miniature arcade cabinets, and even Parker Brothers managed to cram one in there with their version of Q*bert. And then there's the modern era, which is 2005 through 2016. And this era is important because this, of course, is what brought back the arcade mini cabinet. The company Excalibur Electronics was the first company to bring the arcade mini cabinet into the future with their versions of Space Invaders and Frogger. Psst, these aren't that good. But at least they tried. And the other company was Basic Fun Incorporated with their multiple lines of arcade mini cabinets. And this company would really be the modern era's predominant purveyor of arcade mini cabinets, even though their first line was pretty pitiful, but their second line more than made up for it. And this particular line is what brought us to the end of the modern era and into what I'm going to call the post-modern era, which I have no idea what that means, but I think it sounds pretty good, so we'll use it. And the post-modern era is where things really start to get interesting. This era would see the rise of newer companies that wanted to see the miniature arcade cabinet better represented. Which brings us to My Arcade. Your arcade? No, My Arcade. That's what I asked. Your arcade? No, My Arcade. Oh, my head. Your arcade? What is this, Abbott and Costello? No, the company's called My Arcade. And My Arcade would be the newest and most dominant force when it came to the miniature arcade cabinets of the future! And what they had to offer was unlike anything we've seen before. These are actually miniature arcade cabinets that look like arcade cabinets. And what we've had from other companies up to this point weren't bad representations. I mean, except for these. And what the hell is this supposed to be? The point is, we all thought we knew what to expect when it came to miniaturized arcade cabinets. And then we see these things, and it's clear that we weren't expecting enough. Yes, these are damn near perfect nostalgic novelties that remind most of us of where we spent a large majority of our childhoods, the arcades. Yes, they are seemingly works of art, and like all works of art, they're best appreciated from afar. Yes, the big picture makes sense, but when you get closer... Oh, it looks like a load of rubbish! Yeah, when you get closer, the picture looks very different, and these things are no exception. I've talked about this company's miniaturized versions of arcade games throughout the course of this miniseries. I've reviewed their versions of Dig Dug and Galaga, and I've always hinted that there was just something not right. Though these things look great, a closer look reveals that there's just something amiss, and there's a dirty secret right around the corner. And though these things may look like advanced technology of the future may not have advanced its technology. It'll make more sense, and it's time for secrets to be revealed. And today, we're going to reveal such secrets and take a closer look at the company My Arcade and some other companies that brought the miniaturized arcade cabinet here into the future. Today shall be our finest hour and our final battle as we reach the end of our journey into the Microverse! Prepare for miniaturization. Initiating a miniaturization sequence in 3, 2, 1. Initiate. Miniaturize! 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 VHS Pirate Ship presents Into the Microverse! The future will always have a place for relics of the past, and the concept of these relics will live on, forever reforged, remade, redone, over and over again to fit new vessels. And these new vessels would be displays of modern technology, or at least you would think so. And this fact is exemplified perfectly in the products of My Arcade. Your arcade? No, we've already done that bit. Oh, yeah. Did people like it? I hope so. Me too. Anyways, what were you saying? The products of My Arcade are a perfect example of how people will always have a craving for nostalgia. The fact remains that here we are, way into the 2000s, and people still love miniature arcade cabinets, which seem like they are a product of the 80s. And they are, but the more research you do on this, you discover that most of them come from the 2000s. Yeah, a large majority of them come from the modern and postmodern eras of the miniature arcade cabinet. And these little things are always top sellers. If they weren't, companies wouldn't be making them. Yes, the farther we get into the future, the more we wish to look back. And even though technology dictates that you can download a version of Miss Pac-Man on your smartphone, you still would like to have a miniature arcade cabinet of Miss Pac-Man that looks exactly like the arcade cabinet of Miss Pac-Man you played when you were a kid. And as luck would have it, there's been an incarnation of Miss Pac-Man in every single line of miniature arcade cabinets that's ever existed. Well, she's an arcade classic, and arcade classics do what arcade classics do, and that is be marketable. And miniature arcade cabinet versions of Miss Pac-Man will never cease to be. She had one in the original era with Coleco, and she had 2 separate versions with Basic Fun Incorporated in the modern era. And the post-modern era would be no exception, and that brings us to My Arcade's version. So let's talk about that, and let's talk about the first femme fatale of the video game world. Let's talk about Miss Pac-Man. Awkward Miss Pac-Man! Released in arcades in 1982, Miss Pac-Man originally started life as a modification kit to the original Pac-Man. And if you don't know what that means, well, you're not in the boat by yourself. Just know that Miss Pac-Man was never a character intended for this game. Yeah, it was supposed to be called Crazy Otto. Yeah, your guess is as good as mine. I don't even care. And it was intended to be simply an upgrade kit for existing Pac-Man machines. And Namco, the company responsible for Pac-Man, was not even involved. Yeah, copyright laws for video games back then pretty much didn't exist. Just take Monkey Kong, for example, and that's all I really gotta say. Of course, Miss Pac-Man would eventually be forged out of this mess, and Namco would eventually get involved. Though it is basically the same game as Pac-Man, it has its differences and has been described as superior to Pac-Man. And I'm inclined to agree. And if you think the only difference between Pac-Man and Miss Pac-Man is the bow on her head, well, you're wrong. I know, it was a funny joke in Wayne's World, but there is a lot more differences than just that. The board layout, gameplay speed, the power-ups, you know, it's a whole bunch of stuff that's subtle, but means a lot. Actually, neither Pac-Man or Miss Pac-Man have power-ups. I think you're mistakenly referring to the bonus items. Okay, the bonus items. It's fruit. It's fruit. And Miss Pac-Man would be just as much of a marketing powerhouse that Pac-Man was. Hey, she was a lovable and memorable video game character, and as I've been prattling on about this entire miniseries, characters in video games make money, or at least they can. I mean, it's not always the case, but Miss Pac-Man was most certainly the case. There was plenty of merchandise for her, and just look at these Pac-Man and Miss Pac-Man hand puppets. Oh my god! There was even a Pac-Man and Miss Pac-Man big wheel. So Miss Pac-Man was an instant memorable video game character. We all know that. So let's skip ahead and take a look at My Arcade's version of Miss Pac-Man. On its face, it looks tremendous. This looks like the original arcade cabinet. The colors are right, the artwork is right, it's just right. But let's fire this bad girl up and see what she's got. There's the title screen, and it looks weird. We'll look past that. Let's see what the rest of it is like. What in tarnation is this? It doesn't even really sound like Miss Pac-Man. Listen. So what is this exactly? It doesn't look right. It looks familiar, but not right. Now remember, all the My Arcade products are boasted as arcade real feel, real deal games, and are supposed to be arcade accurate ports on a miniaturized version. But this is not a direct arcade port of Miss Pac-Man. Do you know what this is? This is the 8-bit Nintendo port of Miss Pac-Man. Now, even though that's never been confirmed or denounced and denied by My Arcade, the general consensus is that all of the My Arcade miniaturized arcade games are NES ports. Yes, 8-bit Nintendo versions of arcade classics. Now, I don't generally have a problem with that, but we're in the future. Living in the future, right? Modern technology out the wazoo. Why on earth are we using 8-bit Nintendo technology for modern shit? Now, I realize that it's still pretty impressive to put that technology, however dated it may be, into such a small package. And a small package that looks great, by the way. No arguments there, no qualms with that. But I guess, well, I guess we all just expected more than 8-bit Nintendo shit. And that technology was fine back in the day. We had no problems with it. That's what we had. But we're living in the now, 2022, and we're still playing 8-bit Nintendo stuff? Okay, so let me put down my gripe pipe and actually play this game and see what it's like. Yeah, it kind of blows. Now, granted, this is the best mini arcade version of Miss Pac-Man, because the rest of them pretty much stink, but This kind of stinks on a whole new level. Wow, I've never smelled that before. The cabinet looks great, and the controls don't stick, but I don't know how much that means. I mean, it's just such a poor version of this game. I mean, did you even try? I'm sorry, does Miss Pac-Man use that much memory that you couldn't fit the original version on a chip? Oh, and by the way, the same thing is true for their version of Pac-Man. And you know what? The same thing is true for all their versions of all these games. Crushing disappointment and dismay, and woe is us for buying them. Yep, disappointment is the name of the game here. So let's continue to be disappointed and talk about an arcade classic that doesn't really get its just due. It's an arcade classic that's certainly memorable, and the only video game that involves making hamburgers in the most difficult way possible. So let's talk about the next item on our My Arcade Shit list, and let's talk about Burgertime. Burgertime! Released in arcades in 1982, Burgertime would go on to be one of the most unique games of not only that time period, but, ever. Hey, it's not every day you come across a video game that requires you to construct giant hamburgers, all while being pursued by menacing food items. Yes, that's right. In what can only be described as a fever dream, you're trying to build big old burgers whilst being chased by wiggly hot dogs with legs. And I've talked about video game heroes numerous times throughout the course of this miniseries, both well-known and not so well-known, and Burgertime has a protagonist that falls in its own category. Yes, Burgertime follows the adventures of Peter Pepper. He is the hero of Burgertime, and you know, Burgertime is an interesting case where it seems like people remember the game more than they do the hero. It's not like Burgertime is a forgotten about or unheard of game. People just don't seem to know who Peter Pepper is. But everyone knows what Burgertime is, and that's the important part. Burgertime was, and still is, massively successful, a very well-loved game. But the weird part is, this didn't get an arcade mini cabinet until 2018. Yeah, even though it was an arcade hit and stood strongly right beside stuff like Pac-Man and Frogger, its marketing fortunes would not fare as well as those other two games, and it wouldn't get a mini cabinet until much later in life. And My Arcade decided enough was enough and gave Burgertime its first mini arcade cabinet. So that was very nice of them. But what are the problems with this one? Because you know they're right around the corner. Well, not to be a nitpicking nanny here, but right away I noticed that the cabinet art is not the same as the original. I mean, sure, it's only slightly different, but you know, that means a lot. When mini cabinets don't mimic the original design and aren't arcade-accurate miniaturized replicas, well, it just takes the whole novelty away. The whole gimmick is gone. The point of these things is to be miniaturized replicas. That's the fun part, right? Well, I'll get back to this point later on. But this still looks pretty good. It's still neat to have a miniature arcade cabinet of Burgertime, so there's that. So on its face, it's not an arcade-accurate version. But how does it play? I bet it plays great. I bet it's a great representation of this game. Oh, man. I wish that were true. Yep. Once again, this is not the real version of Burgertime. This is the 8-bit Nintendo version of Burgertime. And that's not a bad version of Burgertime. The 8-bit Nintendo port was pretty good, but once again, it's just not what I was expecting, and I'm a little disappointed. And I think this game has a case of the default difficult, because this game is really hard. Harder than I remember it being. I mean, it's relentless. Jeez, it's the first level. Give me a break. And I'll tell you what doesn't help the situation at all is the unresponsive control. This thing sticks like crazy. Yeah, you'll hit the joystick left and it doesn't do anything. Hey, thanks a lot. Yep, there's nothing quite like having a miniature arcade cabinet that barely resembles the original arcade cabinet, which, looking like the original arcade cabinet, is sort of the point. And the said miniature arcade cabinet is of a game that's actually the 8-bit Nintendo version, where the difficulty level is cranked up and the controls stick very bad. Thanks a lot. Yeah, My Arcade really nailed it with this one. You could say this is a very unreasonable facsimile. But all that crap aside, how does it sound? It does sound pretty good, but then again, so did the 8-bit Nintendo version, which is convenient because that's what this one is. And I've always enjoyed the music in this. It's the kind of music you want to hear while you're being chased by hot dogs, and it's the best part of this version of Burgertime. The sound is great, but everything else is just okay. And by the way, back to the cabinet art, the original artwork featured Peter Pepper, and Peter Pepper has a P on his little chef hat, which no doubt stands for Peter Pepper. What's with the H? Who is this guy? I don't know, and oh well. And I know it may seem like I'm trashing my arcade, but that's only because I am. And it's my right to do so, not only as a consumer of their products, but also as a fan of the games they're representing. I certainly have a love-hate relationship with my arcade because, well, I think they could have done better, but also I really appreciate what they tried to do. Because all of the games in their collection do look pretty slick, and they did try to bring the miniature arcade cabinet into the future. But just being in the future isn't enough to guarantee that the supreme technology that surrounds all of us is going to translate into miniature arcade cabinets. Yeah, we are living in a time that should guarantee that we have arcade-accurate versions of video games in miniature arcade cabinet form, but that is not what we got. Perhaps our hopes were far too high, and my arcade could never fulfill our expectations. And like I said, I do appreciate what they tried to do, it just didn't translate very well. So yes, they brought the concept of the miniature arcade cabinet into the future, that we know, but they also gave miniature arcade cabinets to video games we never thought would get one, or even assumed would get one. And this fact is what makes my arcade very special and commendable. Yeah, they made miniature arcade cabinets of common arcade classics like Pac-Man, Miss Pac-Man, Galaga, Galaxian, Space Invaders. And they also made miniature arcade cabinets for not-so-common arcade classics like Dig Dug, Mappy, and of course, Burgertime. But what really makes them recognizable is the fact that they made miniature arcade cabinets for games that some of us consider arcade classics, but no one really ever talks about. Games that don't really get the recognition they deserve. Games that are arcade classics, yet the world does not seem to think so. But my arcade sure did, and they released miniature arcade cabinet versions of games like Bubble Bobble and Heavy Barrel. I mean, who saw that coming? Who expected a Heavy Barrel miniature arcade cabinet? And they also released a miniature arcade cabinet version of Bad Dudes, which is one of my favorite arcade games of all time, and man, did this game get a lot of my quarters as a kid, which technically were my parents' quarters, I guess. I just never thought there would be a miniature arcade cabinet of Bad Dudes, and I was very excited when I saw this. And so I bought it. And then that excitement dwindled into pitiful, woeful disappointment. You see, this was the first My Arcade cabinet that I bought, and I was very unfamiliar with their ways of production. Meaning that whilst I was assuming that since this was the future, this would be an arcade-accurate miniaturized version of Bad Dudes, and I had no idea it would actually be the 8-bit Nintendo version. Because I most carelessly assumed that since we were living in the future, technology would have caught up with the miniature arcade cabinet, and we can do a little better than the 8-bit Nintendo version of Bad Dudes. But it looks pretty good, at least on its face, and I gotta tell you, this is a rare case of these things where the arcade cabinet art doesn't match the original, but it's better because the original really had nothing going for it. At least the side art didn't. Oh wow, the Data East logo. Boy, that's interesting. Makes me want to play this game, all right. Yeah, woohoo. Well, clearly it worked, and it didn't really matter because I played the shit out of this game when I was a kid. So it is cool that My Arcade took some artistic license and decided to spruce up the cabinet art a little bit. The artwork around the screen is arcade accurate, but that's where the good parts of this version end. Yep, like all the other My Arcade mini cabinets, this is the 8-bit version of the game, and I might add that the 8-bit version of Bad Dudes isn't all that good. Well, it's not a terrible version of Bad Dudes, I shouldn't trash it so much, but what makes the 8-bit Nintendo version suck so famously is the hit detection, or I should say lack of hit detection. And if you're not familiar with what hit detection is,
Hit detection is a video game program's ability to recognize collision and interaction between
between sprites. Meaning that if a game lacks hit detection and you're trying to punch a ninja in the face, the computer is not going to recognize what you're doing and it's not going to turn out too well for you. This scenario never works out in your favor and makes the game basically unplayable, and it sucks when the last person to know that you're trying to punch a ninja in the face is the video game itself. But it's still pretty cool to have a miniature arcade cabinet of bad dudes, even if the only accolade it has is that it looks good on your shelf. And for most of these things, that's pretty much all they have going for them, except for elevator action. Yes, you can add elevator action to the list of undervalued arcade classics that My Arcade made miniature arcade cabinets for. But this particular mini cabinet has nothing going on for it as far as shelf appeal because it has no cabinet art. I wonder why My Arcade didn't embellish this one like they did Bad Dudes. Oh well. Another undervalued arcade classic that My Arcade released that no one was expecting is Karate Champ. Yes, Karate Champ, certainly an arcade classic. This game was everywhere when I was a kid. And now I shall recite to you the tragedy of this game. When it was released in arcades in 1984, Karate Champ had a very good start, very strong showing, and made lots of money. And unbeknownst to anyone at the time, this game would set a standard and be the first in what would become a very popular genre of video game, the one-on-one fighter. I know many of us assumed that Nintendo's Urban Champion was the first one-on-one fighting game, but Karate Champ was released several months before Urban Champion. And no, I'm not counting boxing games because, well, that's just different. The tragic part here is that Karate Champ was once a hot commodity, and now it's laughable, only because of its association with the 8-bit Nintendo version, which was wretched. It was so bad that when you bring up Karate Champ, people automatically think of that first. So given its arcade history, it's cool that My Arcade decided to make a miniature arcade cabinet of Karate Champ. But My Arcade did what My Arcade does and put the 8-bit Nintendo version in the damn thing. Yes, the worst possible version of an arcade classic now can be yours to display on your shelf, which is cool as long as you don't play it. So really, Karate Champ has two separate tragedies, which I shall write a haiku about one day, and I shall call it The Two Tragedies of Karate Champ. And My Arcade also released another undervalued and quite possibly the most underrated arcade classic of all time, Rolling Thunder. One of the original and one of the best side shooters, as they say, in video game history. Yes, it's the 8-bit Nintendo version of Rolling Thunder, and even though it is scaled down quite a bit, it's still a great rendition of this game. It was a heavy rental when I was a kid, and I loved it, and I love having a miniature arcade cabinet of Rolling Thunder. And it's awesome, and I know this is going to sound strange, that it's the 8-bit Nintendo version, because that's the version I'm most familiar with. Even though this game is really hard and the controls aren't that responsive, it's still a great version of Rolling Thunder. The cabinet art is spot on with the original arcade cabinet, and this game has a password system. A password for a video game? I haven't entered a password for a video game since I was 10, so this is definitely nostalgic. Now, before I go on trashing My Arcade, it should be known, in all fairness, that they actually have two separate lines of miniature arcade cabinets. There's the standard line, which encompasses all the games I've just talked about, and of course are the 8-bit Nintendo versions, which stirred up a lot of controversy and criticism, but My Arcade made up for that with their premium line. This line featured bigger cabinets and different designs, so basically it doesn't fit in with the rest of your My Arcade collection, but that's okay, because these games contain the actual arcade ROMs, meaning it's not the 8-bit Nintendo version, it's not even the 16-bit Nintendo version. No, these are the real deal. This line included Space Invaders, Street Fighter II Champion Edition, and Contra. And Contra is supreme. I was pleasantly surprised when I played this, especially after playing all the games in the My Arcade standard line. I mean, it's kind of like, geez, can't you make all the games in the premium line? You pretty much proved that you can do it, so why not do it to all of them? Yeah, the premium line proves that the arcade mini cabinet did catch up with the future's technology, and it is possible to put an arcade version in a mini cab. And it should be said that the premium line does contain arcade accurate ROMs, but Contra isn't the same. This is great and all, but this is not the arcade version of Contra. It seems to be some kind of updated version. And though this is pretty awesome, the cabinet art is not arcade accurate. I mean, not that it matters. The original cabinet artwork wasn't that cool anyway, so, you know. But still, back to the point of having miniature arcade cabinets that don't look like the original cabinets, that's the whole point of them. They're supposed to be miniature replicas of arcade games. Even if it's not a good version of the game, you still have a miniaturized replica of the arcade cabinet, and that's really cool. So when you don't have that, you have nothing. You have nothing. You have nothing. You have nothing. You totally defeated the purpose of having an arcade mini cabinet. So Contra doesn't look like the original arcade cabinet, but it's still a great version of the game. And you should probably know that it's called the premium line for more than just the supreme versions of the game. It's called premium, basically for the price point. Yeah, these range from $50 to $70. So, yeah. To sum up, My Arcade did a fair job of bringing the mini arcade cabinet into the future, especially with their premium line, except for the price point. And all of the games in the My Arcade collection are pretty good replicas. Even the ones that aren't replicas are still pretty cool, because the design of them is pretty smooth, and they do look like arcade cabinets. And look, even the little coin slot doors light up, just like a real arcade cabinet. But I do wish the marquee would light up, though. That would really finish off the look. That would be perfect. So, all the constructive criticism aside, I do appreciate what My Arcade tried to do, even though most of the games in their collection are pretty lackluster. And I really hope that they continue to make miniature arcade cabinets. My Arcade had the cojones to bring the miniature arcade cabinet into the future, but they're not the only company to do so. The company Super Impulse also had a burning desire to bring the miniature arcade cabinets into the here and now, but they put their own spin on it and decided to take the term miniature arcade cabinet extremely literally by making the world's smallest arcade cabinets of many arcade hits. This is clever and all, but really though, how are you supposed to play this? These are way too small. I'm not even going to bother. Talk about awkward. And this is a prime example of just because you can do something does not mean you should. The design of your standard arcade mini cabinet is awkward enough, and based on the size, it's not made for comfort. But these little damn things are taking it to a whole new level. I don't even care if they are arcade accurate ROMs. I mean, look at these things. I got big fat hands. How am I supposed to play it? With tweezers? So there's that. And a main criticism about arcade mini cabinets and the companies that make them is that not all games need an arcade mini cabinet. Some games, it just doesn't work based on that game's mechanics. Case in point would be Basic Fun Incorporated's rendition of Mortal Kombat. A great arcade game, yes, but a great mini cabinet? No. The game mechanics of Mortal Kombat requires it to use not only a joystick, but also 6 buttons. 6 buttons on a mini cabinet. I'm sure that looks like shit. Oh, and guess what? It does. Look at this monstrosity. This is supposed to be an arcade cabinet. They had to go with this design so they could fit all 6 buttons on it. I mean, why even bother making a mini cabinet of Mortal Kombat? We were fine not having one, especially this one. This is the shitty Sega Genesis port, and the censored one at that, which means no blood, no fatalities, the two things that made this game famous. And look at the cabinet art. That's not the cabinet art for Mortal Kombat. That's Scorpion from Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3. The cabinet art for the original Mortal Kombat features Johnny Cage in stylish bike shorts. So this mini cabinet encompasses all of what not to do when you're making an arcade mini cabinet. You have totally inaccurate cabinet artwork, you have a shitty design, and you have a terrible version of the game you're representing. Some games just do not need an arcade mini cabinet for them, and Mortal Kombat is most certainly one of those games. The arcade mini cabinet is not going anywhere. Sometimes they get better, sometimes they get worse. The future seems like it has a lot in store for the arcade mini cabinet, and even Coleco, the company that started the whole trend back in 1981, tried their hand at the modernized arcade mini cabinet, and in 2018 released a line of rehashed arcade classics. With that, we've reached the end of our little journey into the microverse, and it certainly has been interesting. I had no idea there were so many arcade mini cabinets. There was a time when I thought there was only the Coleco versions of Frogger and Pac-Man. Boy, was I wrong. It's an entire universe of them. A microverse, if you will. When this expedition began, I posed the question, are arcade mini cabinets more than just a novelty? And the answer we found is no. They are just a gimmick. With the exception of a very few, they are not good versions of the games they represent. And in all fairness, they were never meant to be more than just gimmicks. They are just novelties, simply marketable assets for video games. We are the ones that have raised the bar too high and simply expected far too much. There are way better versions of these games out there that don't require an arcade mini cabinet to play them. And there are way better methods to play them. Some of these games you can even download on your phone. The point is, there is no practical application for an arcade mini cabinet. They are simply a novelty, and it's fun to have a miniaturized replica of your favorite arcade game. But basically, they are no better than simply shelf fodder. Great to display, but not to play. But they're fun, and this whole thing has been fun too. And I certainly hope you've enjoyed Into the Microverse! Be sure to hit subscribe, and take care out there, and I'll see you next time, only on Captain Adam's VHS Pirate Ship.